We want to discuss these issues that have been rolling around since 2014 when Richard Dawkins made those famous tweets. Tell us the background to them. What was happening? What made Richard Dawkins say such a terrible, terrible thing?
Yeah, so in 2014, on Twitter, a lady had said, if I found myself pregnant with a child who had Down syndrome, I genuinely don't really know what I'd do. And Dawkins had this quite blunt response where he said, abort it and try again. And he said it would be immoral to bring it into the world and cause more suffering.
Right.
Which caused the storm at the time, but then came up again the other day in this interview with Brendan O'Connor. And they talked about a number of things, but he raised it, Brendan O'Connor. He wanted to talk to him about it. Relatively objectively, he wanted to talk to him about it, even though Brendan O'Connor himself has a child who has Down syndrome. So he kind of said, look, I'm not having an emotional conversation with you here. I'm just trying to talk about the issue. And so, it kind of came into light again. And so because those comments came to the surface again, Dawkins' name was kind of flying high on Twitter.
Yes.
So
Yeah. And what we want to do is we want to have a look at the full conversation, or parts from the full conversation, because I don't know how you first came across this interview with Brendan O'Connor, but for me it was on Twitter.
Yep.
And there was a 2-minute video that RTE had done of the interview, cut together, and it brought the stark horror of Dawkins' position to light. But what was left out of that video is also worth talking about. And the run-up to that interview is also worth talking about. And the furore around that interview is also worth talking about. So we don't want to just react to the Twitter outrage, as delicious as it is, to have a quick shot of splenetic kind of tweet juice, just, straight cortisol into the bloodstream. As delicious as that might be, we want to take things apart a little bit, see some of the context for what Richard Dawkins was saying, and then see if what Dawkins says actually makes sense on its own terms, and if it doesn't make sense, what are the terms in which we want to think through these issues of life and death. But I think the first thing we want to do is have a look at something that happened early on in the interview, and we really recommend that people have a look at the full interview, which is on the RTE website. The link is in the description box here on YouTube, and it's 20 minutes long. And they have a wide-ranging conversation because Richard Dawkins thought he was going to be discussing his book.
Yeah.
Whereas Brendan O'Connor played Columbo. And then this kind of, you can imagine Brendan O'Connor in the Mac and the cigar saying, just one last thing. But they had a conversation about science, and they had a conversation about religion more generally. And I think it brings to light some important issues that then get discussed later on. But let's have a look at the first clip where Richard and Brendan have a chat.
I know, and it's threaded through the book, which another one of your great themes, which is, I suppose, to put it colloquially, you're not a big fan of religion. Do you think at all that we saw an awful lot of good people actually get great comfort in faith during these very painful times?
I haven't noticed that. I don't deny that people can get comfort from faith. You can even get comfort from something that's false if you believe it sincerely enough. So that is possible, yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think if you're going to make a calculus on the quality of somebody's life, would you say that whatever gets them through the night, if it helps them to have a better quality of life, then that's okay for them?
Within limits, I would say that. But
yeah.
I do, as a scientist, I do value truth. And therefore, I'm not sure that I'm that enthusiastic about getting you through the night if it's downright false.
Okay. So you're not taking any easy shortcuts to happiness. I can see.
No, not.
Yeah.
I think there's a greater happiness to come from understanding the truth.
I found that fascinating in terms of, the ancient Greeks used to speak of the triad of goodness, truth, and beauty. And this conversation orbits around goodness, truth, and beauty in so many different ways. And and as this idea of, you know, whatever gets you through the night, whatever leads to the greatest happiness, you would think that was Dawkins' morality. That certainly seems to be the calculus he brings to the abortion question.
Yeah.
The greatest happiness, the greatest number, and if someone disables, you know, causes greater suffering in the world, then let's eliminate them. But when it comes to truth, Dawkins is like, oh no, there's a higher value than just happiness. And we actually sacrifice happiness on the altar of this higher truth, you know, this higher cause.
Yeah.
That is called truth. And so you think, well, if Dawkins is willing to sacrifice happiness for the sake of truth, why isn't he willing to sacrifice happiness for the sake of goodness? But he doesn't do that. No. He wants to be a rationalist, and he doesn't want false comfort. And then interestingly, he does say that there is a greater happiness to be had that comes through the truth. But then again, you know, if we bring that through to the, you know, aborting a disabled child debate, then wouldn't there be greater happiness to be had from actually following goodness and not following expedience?
Yeah.
So that was interesting, and there's a broader discussion that happens in the 20-minute interview, in which again Dawkins seems to think that there is a beauty as well to science, and a beauty and an awe to following the scientific method and discovering more about the world around us. And it seems like Dawkins kind of gives a free pass to truth, and he gives a free pass to beauty. And then when he's asked about goodness, he's like, well, you know, he then boils it all down to happiness, which is fascinating. Christoph Keating is in the chat. And he says Brendan O'Connor was remarkably restrained in this interview. He showed quite clearly that Dawkins was inconsistent. He says this interview is probably the most comeback that Dawkins is liable to have had since he last debated John Lennox. So, and certainly people have enjoyed the fact that Dawkins was made to look foolish, haven't they? You know.
Well, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, yes, they have. But I think the interesting thing was it's not so much like it for me at least as I watched it or listened to it. It's not that he just looked silly, you know, but it was clear he just didn't have anything to back up what he thought, which was just so fascinating from someone who spent his whole life basically saying, you know, or so much of his the last 15 years at least, you know, banging on about Christians and lack of evidence and you know, just believing, you know, whatever you want to believe, and there he was doing exactly the same thing, and he got completely caught out. You know, it's like he was just caught with his trousers down sort of, and had no comeback really against things. I mean, not only did he have no real intellectual comeback, so you can be in a position where you've got the intellectual comeback, but when you're faced with someone who has a Down syndrome child, you might be a bit more like cautious about what you say. Yeah. But he was in the position where he was obviously feeling a bit cautious about what to say to Brendan O'Connor, but he also didn't have anything really to say. He just kind of had to back off on it. Yeah. And I mean, he did look. Yeah. I mean, I doubt he came away from that thinking, well, that went quite well.
He's I think by the end of this interview, he put the phone down and thought this was a big mistake.
That happened in the middle of the interview, didn't he? He asked him about something, and he got cut off.
That's true.
It sounded like Dawkins had put the phone down. He said, "Oh, I thought I'd offended you, and you left or something." But I thought he'd left as well. But.
Yeah, but I think he underestimated Brendan, and I think Brendan did a whole Columbo on him. It was totally
not being familiar with Brendan O'Connor. I don't know really what type of show it is generally, so I don't know what Dawkins thought going into it. If he did just think I'm here largely to, you know, is it just kind of a bit of like sitting on the sofa with Graham Norton, just talking about my book though, without realising that he might be slightly ambushed on something he did 6 or 7 years ago.
But Brendan did the ambush absolutely brilliantly. Should we have a look at this is the first of 3 clips about how Brendan raises this issue with Richard Dawkins. It is quite delicious.
Listen, I'll get back to the book in 1 second. Can I ask you about one other thing? Because, and I'll be completely honest with you and say I have a kind of an interest in this myself. And I promise you, I'm not taking any offense by it or anything. I'm just curious about it, okay? So I want to ask you about you got involved in a Twitter interaction with a woman who said she would be faced with a real ethical dilemma if she became pregnant with a baby with Down syndrome. You tweeted, abort it and try again. It would be immoral to bring it into the world if you have the choice. Now, I saw you're speaking to somebody who did bring someone like that into the world, okay, but let's put that aside. I'm interested in how do you think it is immoral to bring someone with Down syndrome into the world?
I think that once you have a child with Down syndrome, you love it, you cherish it. Everybody does. That's well known. I wouldn't deny that for one single moment. But before it's born, the vast number of people who take an amniocentesis and is diagnosed with Down syndrome, as a matter of fact, do abort it. This is just a fact. I think in Denmark,
I would accept that fact, and I wouldn't judge anyone's choice about that.
Lots going on there. Lots going on there, including Richard Dawkins saying, once you have a child with Down syndrome, then don't do anything with it. Okay. I'm looking at that sonogram. Looks like I've got a child with Down syndrome. Like, what do you mean once you have a child?
Yeah.
At what point does the child gain moral value? Well, he then goes on to clarify, once the child is born, the child now has moral value, which is a very arbitrary, bestower of moral value.
Yeah,
the birth
absolutely.
canal bestowing all moral value. But then Dawkins does what I think is a very significant thing in that he brings up what we in fact do.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, that's probably the point where he was strongest.
Yeah.
In that he just kind of said, look, what I'm saying is no different to what goes on.
Yeah.
And so the statistic is something like 90% upwards of people who have the amniocentesis test, who discover a child with Down syndrome, abort the child. And so that, there is a strange irony that, so many people, let's say 90% and upwards of people are outraged by the kind of thing Dawkins has said.
Yes.
But yet 90% and upwards of people would do exactly what Dawkins has said.
Yes.
In that situation, because they are doing that.
Yes.
That's the fascinating thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah. His big problem was that, he said the quiet bit out loud. He said the thing, he brought into the light the thing that we already do, and everyone's just outraged. Everyone is outraged. Like, everyone is making that moral calculation. They don't articulate it in those terms, because you can't articulate it in those terms without being horrified, as the whole world has been. The whole world is horrified by saying what the whole world is actually doing.
We live in a very strange. It's that cognitive dissonance, isn't it? Of we live in a society which admirably looks at people who are differently abled and says, hey, we need to make society more accessible for people. We need to be less discriminatory because these people are not less valuable than us. And they even bring things. It's not just kind of like they're there and they have a value. It's just they do bring something as well to the table, but not before they're born.
Yeah.
Like in the womb.
Yeah.
Because you can, we say there's a difference, isn't there, between children with disabilities in the womb and children who don't have disabilities, because you can abort a child with a disability up to term.
Yes.
Even in the UK.
Yeah.
Whereas you couldn't if it was a child who had no kind of recognised disability.
Yeah.
So it's just this weird thing going on in our society where we're saying everybody's valuable.
Yeah.
We love everybody and we want to include everybody. But actually, before they're born, not so much. It's a really strange thing.
Yeah. Christoph Keating has just said, how many people say privately the sort of thing Dawkins wrote on Twitter? The pressure to abort is high, but unknown. Of course it's high. It's massively high, and the pressure comes from all sorts of quarters. From family as well as the medical profession as well as the sense that Dawkins articulates that this child will cost us you know, as a family and as a society, weighs on people. To the point where Dawkins is willing to say it's immoral. At least in 2014, he said it was immoral.
He did back off on that, didn't he? And said, look, maybe that was too strong. Let's put aside immorality.
Yeah, but that is the kind of pressure that is already on people. But one inconsistency I thought was, you know, Brendan then said, you know, I don't want to take issue with anyone's choice in those matters. You know, like if any parent does choose to abort, that is their choice, and I don't judge that. And I think that's inconsistent. Like, if we're going to judge his words, why don't we judge the actual actions?
Yeah.
You know,
It's like he's just said that you could do this.
Yeah.
But whereas but then there's the actual act of doing that.
Yeah.
And it does seem that that's being given the let off. So to
What's
speak.
what's worse? You know, talking about it or doing it. So yeah, I think we've all got a consistency problem on this, and Dawkins actually reveals it by saying this is what people are doing, and it's not just amniocentesis, whatever the plural of amniocentesis is. It's these non-invasive prenatal tests that are coming in that are so simple. You just do a blood test. You don't, you know, there's nothing invasive about it. And in all the countries in which the NIPTs are brought in, then we abort them at ever higher rates.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Dawkins is just saying what we do. So why the outrage? You know, I mean, okay, there should be outrage, but there should be a more thoroughgoing outrage about the actions and not just the words. But then in this next clip, let's have a look at the basis on which Dawkins makes that judgment. Why does he say that it is immoral to bring such a child into the world? And we'll see that it's consequentialism, it's utilitarianism. Let's have a look.
But why is it immoral not to abort it?
Well, that was probably putting it a bit too strongly, but given that the amount of suffering in the world probably does not go down, probably does go up, compared to having another child who doesn't have Down syndrome, then that's what I meant.
Okay.
But I want to stress over and over again that I was of course not suggesting that people who already have a Down syndrome child don't love it, shouldn't love it. And
absolutely. I didn't take that from it.
I'm
at
sure
all.
you didn't, but many people did, and I think that was the reason it got controversial.
What I'm interested in is how do you know that it increases the amount of suffering in the world to bring in a child with Down syndrome into the world?
I don't know it for certain. It seems to me to be plausible that if a child has any kind of disability, then you probably would increase the amount of happiness in the world more by having another child instead.
Do you think? But you have no reason for knowing that.
I have no direct evidence. No, it just seems plausible.
Just, you know, you're such a scientific, logical person that I thought that you could possibly have some logical backup to it. So, do you know anyone with Down syndrome?
Not intimately, no.
Okay, yeah. I mean, look, everyone has their own experience of it, and possibly my experience would be that you're not necessarily right, and I think a lot of people would think you're not necessarily right. But
look,
anyway.
I'm sure that you love your child.
Oh yeah, nothing to do with that. I'm not having an emotional discussion with you here. I'm simply having a logical discussion with you. You said that you would increase the amount of suffering in the world. I was just asking you in a logical way how you know that.
Brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, fair play to him. You know, fair play to Brendan O'Connor. He handled it very, very, very well, I thought. And he really did corner him. You can almost. I mean, you can see Dawkins on his phone, just cringing, can't you? Like,
I don't know. Maybe not cringing enough. I think. You know, as we'll see in a second, you know, Dawkins is perfectly happy to actually continue the conversation in quite a measured sense. And that's good. I'm glad to have measured conversations. But when the measured conversations are about the existence or not of a subgroup of the population, you know, that's a bit dystopian. So what's fascinating is here is the basis on which Dawkins makes his calculation. His calculation is entirely predicated on utilitarianism. We want the greatest happiness of the greatest number, and we would not be increasing the sum of happiness in the world if we brought disabled people into the world. That is the assumption. What I think is a mistake is to assume that that is the metric by which we judge things.
Yep.
And then to say, oh yeah, but disabled people, they actually can have happy lives, and they can lead to the sum of happiness being greater in the world. I think that's a massive mistake, because it's to play into the fact that people have got to earn their right to exist.
Yeah, and it comes through being happy,
Yeah.
or not experiencing suffering.
Yeah.
And I mean, if that was your criteria, I mean, why only apply that in the womb anyway?
Right.
Like last week we were talking about depression.
Yeah.
That's a lot of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, that was we could decrease the suffering then.
Yeah.
Just get rid of all the depressed people.
Yeah. Right. And this is a sign that we are kind of very utilitarian in our society, that suffering is the metric, and we just want to eliminate suffering. And so one of the really chilling ways of doing that is by eliminating sufferers. Yeah. So assisted suicide, euthanasia, just you want to, if the absolute goal is to eliminate suffering, then just eliminate sufferers. And if you want to eliminate sufferers, then why not eliminate the disabled as well? And we're just on really shaky ground if our only comeback to that is, oh no, but some disabled people have really fulfilling lives and can be really productive in society and put a smile on your face.
Yeah.
And at that point,
only some.
Only
there
some.
might be some others.
Yeah.
And
I can understand why people do this, and I think there's a time and a place for doing this. But there's a time and a place for pointing out that, like, just psychologically, the happiest people on earth have Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Like when you ask people with Down syndrome, are you happy with your life? It's like 99% of people with Down syndrome are happy or very happy with their lives. Like that's not normal, your normal modern, ask Oxford professors, let's say, what percentage of them are happy or very happy with their lives.
Of course.
So there's a time and a place for pointing that out. I don't think here is the time and the place for pointing that out, because then you're basically agreeing that as long as they're happy, or as long as they contribute to overall happiness, we'll let those guys through, right? So yeah, one way not to respond to this, I think, is to play the utilitarian game. Because Dawkins himself doesn't play the utilitarian game earlier on. Like when it comes to religion, if religion makes you happier, he's like, well, no, but I don't want any fairy tales to make me happy. I want the truth. There's a higher value for him, and we should be saying, yeah, and there's a higher value than happiness when it comes to this question, and that higher value has got to be the value of life in and of itself. So I think it was delicious for Brendan to ask Dawkins what evidence he has to back it up, because prior to that he was Mr. Evidence, he was Mr. Truth, he was Mr. Rationality, and then no, when it comes to this question, it's an intuition, it's a feeling that he has no backup for. So that was the irony of the utilitarian being called out on that. But I do think that we ought not to play the utilitarian game the way that both Dawkins and O'Connor were kind of assuming. But then in the final clip on this, we sort of round things off, and let's listen to the final clip on this.
Listen, what other imperfections would you screen out?
Well, I think deafness, blindness. I mean, it seems to me to be when you have the choice, when it's early in pregnancy, and the fetus has hardly started to develop, almost everybody, as a matter of fact, does abort a child if it has an easily diagnosable disability early in pregnancy.
Okay, but if we put aside what people do, you believe that if we can check for deafness or blindness or any other disabilities, that we should, and look, I'm not criticizing you here, you think we should abort those children, those fetuses.
Well, it's a choice that the parent has.
But do you think it would be immoral for them not to do it?
Let's leave out the immoral.
No, but you brought immoral into it.
Okay, well, I take that back.
Okay.
I think it would be wise. I think it would be wise and sensible to abort a child which had a serious disability, which was diagnosed early in pregnancy.
Okay.
And I suspect that almost everybody does that in practice.
Okay, and there's one other thing I would say on it is purely, again, on the basis of rationality. You know, children who are so-called perfect can cause terrible suffering in the world as well. But I suppose we have no way of checking, have we?
No, of course.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. I mean, as he says, what other things would you screen out? Blindness, deafness.
It was just on the tip of his tongue,
Straight
wasn't
I've
it?
got those ones ready.
Oh man.
A bit. It's such a slippery slope, isn't it? Blindness, deafness, ADHD, dyslexia,
redheads,
short-sighted. That's it. I'm gone.
Yeah.
But I mean,
they face bullying. They face bullying in life. Redheads do.
Sure.
So
it is a hop, skip, but it is a hop, skip, and a jump, isn't it? You're not far from. Like, where do you draw the line and say, like, what a serious disability is?
Yeah. Yeah. I
mean, if I was a hunter-gatherer still, I'd be stuffed.
Yeah.
Because I can't see anywhere. Like, I'd be useless.
That's true.
I'd be gone.
Yeah. You are defective.
Yeah.
I hadn't truly appreciated your deformity before, but now I see it.
You did not look upon my deformity.
I don't even see you as short-sighted. But yeah, it's the fact that it was on the tip of his tongue. It was like, what other deformities? Well, deafness and blindness for one. It's like instantly, what vision of society is this? I tell you what vision of society it is. It's the vision of society that every other culture has had outside of Christianity.
Yeah, sure.
And it's a human universe. Like, exposing your infants is basically, there were some Germanic tribes that didn't do it outside of the influence of Christianity, but but like those Germanic tribes and Christians, they were the weirdos. Of course, if you have a child that is defective in some way, or a female or a girl, then well, they're expensive, and they cost you more. Like, girls, they cost you more, and they might not be as strong to work in the fields. So, if we're going to do a cost-benefit analysis, then that's where you come to. And Christoph Keating has said, it really sounds like the stork brings babies on Dawkins' view, because he keeps on saying, before you have them, Of course, once you have a child with Down syndrome, you love the child. Like, well, at what point do you have the child?
Yeah.
I thought you were a professor of biology. Like, where do these children come from? But he is just articulating a philosophy that like, outside of the influence of Jesus Christ... outside of the influence of Jesus Christ, this is just normal. This is just natural. Like, of course you eliminate the weak. This week there was someone was talking to me about natural law and how brilliant Aristotle is and helping us to have some common ground with the unbeliever. And because they believe in logic and you believe in logic, so can't you establish logically that the child in the womb is also part of the human family? Premise one. Premise two, therefore, as part of the human family, you should accord them provision and protection and not kill them. And I was like, well, maybe logic can grant you premise one. But what logic says, because you're dealing with another human being, therefore you don't kill it?
Yeah. Big jump, isn't it?
It's like, especially in Aristotle's world, the paterfamilias, the father, the head of the household, has the absolute power of life or death over every member of his household, whether they're in the womb or out of it, and could kill other members of his household when they're outside the womb. And just because they're part of humanity or even part of the household doesn't exempt them from the absolute right of the strong to kill the weak. And Aristotle would say, well, nature would teach you that there's a natural inequality, and so let's preserve the natural inequality and let the strong rule over the weak. There's nothing logical about the pro-life argument, I would say. It hangs together. The premises hang together, but one of these premises is not really demonstrable logically, which is because they're human, don't kill them.
Sure, there's a value.
It's Jesus who teaches you the equal human value, and that we should prize the weak, because actually, economically speaking, a child is not as valuable as an adult.
Sure,
you can't put them to work. They're not strong. They're not gonna give you the same value. So where does the value exist? Well, it's got to be a value that's given, because the image of God is on the child, and therefore you treat them as morally equal to every other person. But Dawkins is absolutely, if Dawkins is right biologically, he's also right morally, I would think. Which is not to say that there aren't a whole bunch of humanists pro-lifers. There are.
Yeah.
And there are atheist pro-lifers that are out there.
Yeah, of course.
But it's of course because they live in a world shaped by Christianity.
Yeah,
I think.
The water we swim in and all that Tom Holland stuff, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. So Christoph's made some good points as well. How many depressed people might take an opportunity to end their suffering with so-called dignity? Where was the other great point that Christoph made? Yes, Brendan did show that even on Dawkins' own reasoning, Dawkins could not show his conclusion. So I think that's right. That the fact that Brendan was holding his feet to the flames and saying, look, even on utilitarian grounds, even on scientific grounds, you don't have the evidence to back up your claim. He showed an inconsistency there. And also earlier I said that Dawkins just said the quiet bit out loud, and Christoph said he didn't just say what we do, he did say what we ought to do. So just as we do in fact abort the disabled, Dawkins said we ought to, and that was the step that's sort of horrific.
Yeah, it's the right thing, isn't it, to do that in his view?
Yeah. Whereas allowing people to do that, aren't you saying it's the right thing to do? If it's permissible legally to do something, aren't you giving a moral stamp of approval to it?
To some extent, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, not that crimes and sins are the same thing; they're not. But Christoph also said that Richard Dawkins should talk to Tom Holland, or maybe rewatch Star Trek's Bread and Circuses episode. There is a brilliant description of Star Trek's Bread and Circuses episode on the Act 17 Apologetics channel. So David Wood did a video just yesterday where he goes through the Star Trek Bread and Circuses episode. Because this is back in classic William Shatner land of Star Trek. And it's this episode in which they come across a civilization that's identical to Earth, but it's as though Christianity never happened. And so the Roman Empire just grows and grows. It never fell. And so now there's gladiatorial games. They're just broadcast live on TV, And it's an utterly brutal society. It's a terrifyingly alien world because Jesus and the revolution of Jesus has not, gotten hold of that civilization. And it's fascinating the way that episode
interesting
continues. Maybe we'll put a link in the show notes and in the description to that Act 17 Apologetics video. But anything more to say on these issues?
I think just on that issue of, many people are outraged by the kind of things Dawkins says, but yet we see so many people in that situation do the thing, would abort a child like that. And we've kind of said there is that logical inconsistency there. But I mean, I think there's just it's a unwillingness. If you're thinking about suffering, there's an unwillingness to suffer,
right,
as well. Because
right.
So, I mean, if anyone who has children would know that like having any child is a strain on you in some way. Whether if you think of it as a strain or whatever, it takes a lot from you to raise a child, and of course, children with disabilities will have varying levels of strain as well. It may well be much more strenuous raising a child with a disability. But there's that thing, isn't it? I think what it comes down to is that people look at it and say, well, I'm prepared to suffer to an extent of raising a child, but I'm not prepared to suffer to the extent of someone raising a child like this.
Right.
That, like my kids, presumably by the time they're about 18, hopefully they'll be relatively self-sufficient, and they'll be able to... I'm sure there's some parents with older children now laughing.
18, haha.
But they'll presumably be able to go off and lead a life of their own, and they won't need us there to feed them and clothe them every day and stuff. Whereas some people may be thinking, well, but what if I have a child who, until the day I die, I literally have to pour myself out into their life. And I think there's an unwillingness to do that. And of course, I think from a Christian point of view is that Jesus is the one who comes and pours himself out. That life, the life of giving of yourself for others, is very much the life of God,
yes.
Isn't it? And it's just where we, it's interesting to think like where we draw a line on that.
Yes.
For some of us.
Yes.
That we're willing to do it for a child that we would deem normal, so to speak, in inverted commas. Yeah. But a child who has, a disability, we think, I'm not willing to pour myself out that much. So I wonder whether it becomes less about the child, but more about us.
Right.
So we'd rather be comfortable.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Ben Woodcraft's made the great point that David Wood, who I just mentioned, has to look after his disabled children on a daily basis, on a nightly basis. I mean, he's up all through the night watching his children who could choke to death at any moment, and they are profoundly disabled, and yet he has found a happiness and the good life in giving himself for his children. And so maybe that helps him process this issue as well. And it seems to me like if you want to just eliminate suffering, then you should go the whole hog and be an anti-natalist. Anti-natalists just say, well, all people entering planet Earth increase the sum of unhappiness.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is immoral to bring anyone into the world. And they're just taking Richard Dawkins' logic. And,
they're just taking it to the logical conclusion further down the line, yeah.
Which is what Brendan O'Connor says. He says, that even so-called normal children cause all kinds of pain and unhappiness.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Hitler, Bin Laden, Pol Pot, Stalin. Yeah, I'm not aware any of them had any particular abnormalities, that we would have looked at, and gone in the womb. Oh well, they're clearly these guys are going to be, bringing a lot of suffering into the world. Yeah, yeah. Amanda Kay says, love is sacrifice. My daughter's medical care sent me to the ER twice due to stress. It's always worth it. And that's a beautiful testimony to the way of Jesus. And it brings in that value, love. I mentioned the sort of the triad in Greek philosophy of goodness, truth, and beauty. What's that missing? That's missing love. This the greatest of all these values is love. And you don't get love if you're just trying to balance happiness versus pain. You'd never get married if you did that. You'd never... if you're just trying to eliminate suffering from your life, you would never risk anything. You'd never, there'd be no romantic gestures and that sort of thing. And so love is the greatest thing. And again, I think that's infected Richard Dawkins' philosophy when it comes to science. So when it comes to science, and the faith position, he doesn't want anyone to be deluded with a comforting fiction when it comes to faith.
because there's a higher good to actually facing the pain of a godless universe, right? But there's a happiness on the far side of that, says Dawkins. You face the truth, even if it's not the opiate of the masses. You face reality without the comfort of this sort of sky daddy. And on the far side, there is a goodness to truth that leads to a sort of happiness. And that's quite a Christian thing. And especially when you translate it out of that realm into the moral realm. And you're just like, well, when you give up on the pleasure versus pain, calculations, and you just sacrifice in the name of love, it is painful, but on the far side of that, you discover a goodness and a love and a happiness even that is, far superior than anything that you had when you were just trying to keep yourself safe. So what do you lose when you just go for the pain versus pleasure calculations? You lose love, and you lose risk, and you lose heroism, and
I think that love is sacrifice. I guess from that Christian perspective, because we have love for others means to sacrifice ourselves for others, as is the example of Jesus. And I wonder whether in our society what we have is this kind of flipped thing, is that like we have a love for ourselves, and therefore we will sacrifice others for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's kind of the flip of it, isn't it? That, people say love. Yeah, because I'm sure you would find someone who would say, well, the loving thing to do would be to abort the child. Yeah. But it's not loving for others, it's loving for yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or when I say loving, I use that in inverted commas, it's what's better for me.
Yeah. And guys, do listen to the whole 20 minutes, because it's fascinating how inconsistent Dawkins is on all sorts of levels. But one of the other levels is on the freedom of speech issue. He's quite happy to bring discomforts into other people's lives for the sake of a higher ideal called truth. And if it's not politically correct, and if it's judged as something that's cancelable by the woke culture, Richard Dawkins doesn't care. He's going to, because there's a higher value, and causing pain for the sake of the higher value is totally fine if the higher value is this abstract thing called truth. And I guess what we're saying, what the pro-life position is that the higher value is this thing called love, which involves my life for you, not your life for me. Yeah. And on the far side of my life for you, Jesus said, if you give your life, you'll find it. There is a true happiness on the far side of that sacrifice. But yeah. Love your neighbor as yourself, says Duns Scotus. I love that handle, Duns Scotus. Yeah. Although we do get dunces from Duns Scotus, don't we? But it's an ironic thing. But anyway, measure thy life by loss instead of gain, says Amanda Kay, quoting Ugo Bassi. Measure thy life by loss instead of gain, not by the wine drunk, but the wine poured forth. For love's strength standeth in love's sacrifice. Wow.
That's a good one, isn't it?
Wow. I don't think we can say anything after that. I think it would be immoral to try to say anything further to that. Measure thy life by loss instead of gain, not by the wine drunk, but the wine poured forth. For love's strength standeth in love's sacrifice. Boom. I'm gonna look me up some Ugo Bassi. That sounds good.
Mic drop.
Mic drop. Thank you, Amanda Kay. Nothing more to be said after that. Except, how can people find us on social media, Paul?
Yeah. So all the social media platforms, obviously we're here on YouTube, so give us a subscribe if you haven't already. And then Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all those things. Speak Life UK, if you search for us there, you should find us, and you can follow, whatever it is on that different medium. And then, of course, if you want to have a look at some of the bits that are coming up, keep up with resources that are coming out, you can always sign up to the email, speaklife.org.uk/sign up, and we'll kind of send you a weekly email with a bit of info about what's going on.
Brilliant. And on this very YouTube channel, we've had 5 videos in the series called Seeing the Future, and feel free to use those in any church settings or youth group settings that you might have. They're 5 kind of 12-minute talks that are all about Christ's post-resurrection appearances. And this Friday as well, there'll be a video where I am interviewed all about preaching and my theology of preaching. So to get all that stuff, make sure that you are subscribed and to tap that bell here in YouTube. But Paul Feesey, thank you very much.
Glen Scrivener, thank you very much. We got there in the end, didn't we?
In the end. We hope so. We hope so. No more Daleks. Yeah. All right. God bless and see you next week.
Bye.